When you go to other countries, their education and what they learn is totally different from ours now. It used to be what the Europeans and how they teach their kids with the different languages and the histories and stuff like that. America used to be like that, but those days are long gone. A lot of Americans are very ignorant to the fact of history and even our Constitution or politics and public policies. So when you do hear someone that has very good diction, and I'm not talking about the judge, so a lot of people out here in media, social media, that have perfect diction. They sound good and they sound convincing. So it's easy to persuade you guys to believe whatever they say because you don't do the work yourselves. Now, there are things that you could research and study, right? And may say one thing, but then you could go somewhere else and it may say something else, and that may be the truth. So, how do you decipher? But you're not even doing that. You have an opinion. Everybody has a right to their opinion. That's what makes America great. But that doesn't mean what you're saying is a fact. And the problem is we are conflating facts from fiction, facts from opinions. More than 50 universities across the United States are being investigated for alleged racial discrimination as the Trump administration intensifies efforts to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI programs that officials say exclude white and Asian American students. The U.S. Department of Education announced the probes, which can lead to institutions losing federal funding over race based preferences in admission, scholarships, or any aspect of student life. Why it matters. The investigations mark an aggressive expansion of the Republican led push against DEI initiatives in higher education. Following a Supreme Court ruling in 2023 that struck down affirmative action in college admissions, the Trump administration has widened its scrutiny scholarships, mentorship programs, and other university policies perceived to favor specific racial groups. The Trump administration aggressive push against the DEI program has fueled a broader national debate over race conscious policies in higher education. Conservative groups argue that such initiatives unfairly disadvantage white and Asian American students, while proponents contend they are essential for leveling the playing field and fostering inclusivity. For example, among institutions facing scrutiny are Yale, Duke, and Massachusetts MIT, along with major public universities such as Arizona State, Ohio State, and Rutgers. Most of these investigations are tied to universities' partnerships with the PhD Project, a nonprofit aimed at increasing minority representation in business academia. The administration claims such programs engage in race exclusionary practices. I want to get your thoughts, and I do see that we have somebody that came up.
Well, late 1966, early 1967, myself and some other black students and black faculty, few as we were at UCLA, drafted up one of the first affirmative action proposals. What we came up with was race neutral. We knew that it would lead to reverse discrimination claims if we included race. What we did was just say the programs that this university and others use to admit athletes for their football, basketball, track, swim teams, baseball teams, etc., where those athletes don't match the standard admissions criteria should be applied for other purposes dealing with background, educational deprivation, poverty, circumstance, and we kept it free of race. Now, when you added up the mix, the people that suffered from this the worst were obviously going to be minorities, but you didn't have to say it. Now, what we came up with is this. For athletes, they had a 3-pronged test: grade point average, aptitude test, and other factors that indicated an ability to succeed. What was going on was mission will be based on a competitive assessment of grade point average, aptitude test, and or other factors that indicated an ability to succeed. For the athletes, it was spending all of this time training, playing ball, traveling, and with that on the table, that they did get the grade point averages they did, with the aptitude tests they did, indicated that did they not, if they did not have to deal with these third factor things, i.e., athletics, they would have scored much higher. We said, forget the athletic component. Let's talk about somebody grew up in a broke down neighborhood with a quasi illiterate, if not illiterate family in an area that was characterized by high violence and impoverishment. Okay, that would stand in for the athletic field. And if they can succeed and get to the point where they are nominally competitive, that should be an indication that if the playing field was level, they would succeed. So we got this affirmative action thing started. The problem came in with some selfish Negroes at University of California's Berkeley campus. They partied. They were from upper or boule Negro families. They did drugs. They did the fraternity sorority thing to the exclusion of everything else. And they had a deficient assessment of grade point average and aptitude tests. There were no other factors that indicated an ability to succeed because they came from what were, in fact, upper middle class families. So what they said was you should have a quota of Black folk. And when you have this quota, just take the high scoring Black people. And we said, don't do that because that interjects race into the equation specifically, and that will result in reverse discrimination. Now, when Bakke came up in 1972, I know this because I was working for Housing and Urban Development in their educational statistics department. In California, the magic number was 19. In the whole state of California, they had 19 Black dental students. They had 119 Black medical students and 219 Black law students. That's in the entirety of the biggest state in the union. So what we said was we can expand this number if instead of getting a small quota, we keep it race neutral. These folk up at Berkeley, the colored, did an agreement with the administration, which was not desirous of getting militant Blacks and Hispanics and Native Americans and Asians in these schools. So they said, okay, fine, we like it. We will give you admission. Once we give it to you, by the time it gets through court, you will have at least finished your first 2 years. You will get your medical degree. Then you'll have to do your internship in your residency, but you're over the hump. Meanwhile, Bakke will get you in and give you a full economic ride to get you in. So everybody collaborated. And the rest of us Black folk were saying, hey, don't do that. You're going to ruin it for everybody. But they didn't give a damn. So the few of them got in and ruined the whole affirmative action thing for everybody else. Now, California's Constitution, written and adopted in 1851, 10 years before the Civil War started and slavery was still alive and well in a whole lot of the United States, said specifically the University of California is to develop leadership. Our colored brethren, so recently escaped from or released from slavery, need leadership. So we should not focus entirely upon academia, but on developing leadership in the colored community. It also cited that need for the Hispanic community so Spanish gangs would not control the neighborhoods. It specifically used the term gangs. When it came to Chinese, it said, we do not want them run by Tong and criminal enterprise. We need them to develop leadership. And the whole university was set up to develop leadership in industry, science, technology, though they didn't call it that then, agriculture, and literature, and in anything, not just academia.
Mhm.
So they completely neglected that part of it, and that's how we got this setup. Now, when Justice Roberts, a year and a half ago, wrote his opinion supposedly outlawing affirmative action, his opinion read almost exactly like our proposal for affirmative action now almost 60 years ago.
Mhm.
So what we wind up happening is something that is returning this whole thing to sanity, because effectively it does just what we predicted in 1969 and 70, 71 and 72, when you start interjecting race and start giving a preference for nothing but race. You start reverse discrimination. We could recognize the term from 5 years before it got used. And that's exactly what happens. In other words, if you give preference to somebody because they are black, you are also acknowledging the legitimacy of giving preference to somebody because they are white. So we said to keep that out of the equation and all of the hostility that that generated, leave it race and ethnically neutral and start talking about conditions. And if you went to college, you ought to be artful enough to draft what you want without including race in it, which you can. Now,
So,
there is a bad form of affirmative action right now that no one wants to talk about. Okay, now, remember when Trump was reading off this guy's grade point average, the one that was in 6 sports, and he announced was accepted to West Point? You remember him?
no.
Yeah, the State of the Union. He stood
Oh,
behind.
I probably wasn't paying attention at that part, but okay.
Okay, he said he had a 4.43 grade average. How the hell do you get a 4.43 grade average when you've got a situation where a is 4.0, a B is 3.0, a C is 2.0, and a D is 1.0? What happens is they were talking about this guy who was in high school, and he went to a place where they had uh, advanced placement tracks. So what happens is if you're a high school student and you take an advanced placement course and you get a B, you don't get a 3.0 for your grade average to add to it. You get a 5.0. If you get an A, it's not 4.0, it's 6.0. And if you are engaged in what they call an advanced placement track school, you get an additional 1.0 added to whatever your grade point average is. So you would get black students, Hispanic students who went to decrepit schools, public schools that did not have many advanced placement courses, if any, and some of them would have a straight A average all through high school, a 4.0, but they would get outscored by students who had A's and B's if some of those B's came from advanced placements, because they wouldn't get 4.0, they'd get 5.0. So you have kids like this guy that got admitted to West Point with a 4.43, which meant he had A's and B's and some C's. Whereas there's a student that went to one of the high schools, say in South Central Los Angeles, who might have gotten straight A's, but got a lesser grade point average. See, nobody talks about that kind of reverse or that kind of absolute discrimination based on where you went to school.
What you're saying is when you make something race-based, it actually harms Black people. So if we're going to be specific, and it harms any other group, but it harms Black people when you make it race-based. And going back, just like you did the timeline back in your day, the intention was not race-based because that benefited us when it's not race-based.
Yeah. See, in other words, this reverse discrimination that is in effect now by this advanced placement thing is not based on race. It doesn't mention it, but it is effectively race because it deals with where you live. The only reason I was bringing up Beverly Hills is Beverly Hills High School has so many advanced placement courses that damn near everybody that graduates from that has got a grade point average of over 4.0. So you grow up in an area where you go to Manual Arts High School, which is down in the hood, or Fremont or Jefferson, they don't have many, if any, advanced placement courses. So you can't get as high a grade point average. But nobody looks at it as discrimination because they avoid race in it. You get what I'm saying? That's how you craft this, and it seems that the woke folk just can't get it out of their souls. They got
what should you do? So
and poor black folk, you know, black folk are so down that you have to
so then what is the solution?
The solution is if you went to goddamn high school, you ought to be able to draft something that's race neutral or ethnicity neutral that still gets you in, just like they do with this advanced placement. It's as racist as anything, except it doesn't mention race.
So, okay, and I'm gonna ask this one last thing, and I'm gonna bring the person in. But if you go to a school that don't have advanced classes, it has nothing to do with race. But let's just say social economic. If you go to a school and they don't have classes for advanced placement classes, that's a problem because compared to a school that does, not race
based. See how they accomplished what they wanted without saying anything about race. In other words, you live in Beverly Hills. Every goddamn student graduating gets a chance to be in the advanced placement track. But and who lives in Beverly Hills?
Right. But if you live somewhere else and they're not offering advanced placement track, you don't benefit from that.
Yeah. So in other words, you give a preference to rich white folk without saying it.
Right.
So black folk, what we did is the same thing in 1967 when we came up with the first affirmative action program, one of the first in the country. We were race neutral. We just stated adverse conditions that
limited our ability to succeed or whatever.
Yeah. So in other words, who lives in these places?
Right.
So white people. But for the most part, it wasn't.
Right. It just so happened it was all black people. But basically what you're seeing is forget about the race. Look at the condition.
Yeah. In other words, right now, critical race theory, which was by Professor Crenshaw, basically plagiarized what we came up with in 1967. But it's not plagiarism because it was dedicated to the public the way we did it. It just alters a few things, but is almost word for word identical with what we came up with. I think she was trying to get our publication to get tenure, but she made some crucial changes. So instead of it being something to motivate students, get them angry, get them engaged in it, it says, oh, you other people are so bad. Look what you did to us. You need to give us a break and you need to make us whole. Our objective was, we don't give a damn what you do. Just get the hell out the way. We'll do it ourselves. Right. See, that's the difference, right. Which is why I think they need to get the hell rid of CRT, critical race theory, and they need to get rid of that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it insists on saying these are some poor, pathetic people, which is insulting, and somebody ought to be angry as hell to be said. You're poor, pathetic, and hopeless and helpless, and you can't do shit for yourselves. You're begging for somebody to do it for you. That insults the hell out of me. But some folk, I guess, they're just loose to that slave thing where massa does everything for you, gives you a few handouts and rewards. So, you know, that's what the Democratic Party does. They invented that shit. So they keep doing it.
All right.
And I think it's bad and it needs to be killed because black folk, Hispanic folk, Asian folk, Native Americans, we all can do this if we get an even playing field. That's like you have a football game and one team only gets 10 men on the field and the other team gets 11.
Sounds good, what you're saying, and that should be the case.
And in 50 years of
Not the case. It's not the case, and it's not just Black people. It's honestly other groups separate themselves and actually create public policies for their group where they live at to advance. So it's not just a Black thing. There are other people who fall into that, wanting to separate themselves to advance themselves.